Welcome to this session. And now let us start with this session. The first session is we are about 5-10 minutes late because of the disturbance. So now let's begin. Then I have given the title to this session, Listen to the Lord. And we are going to have 6 sessions altogether. The first session will be introduction to the Pentateuch as such. Then the second session is going to be on second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, remaining 5 sessions on the 5 books of Pentateuch, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. So here we begin with the introduction to the Pentateuch. And as I was talking about that, here we have the most important commandment. The most important words in the Old Testament are these: Shema Israel, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. Deuteronomy 6:4. For the Jews, they are they're the most important words for their lives. So these words, I want to begin with this session with singing these words. Shema Israel, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. 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 Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God. The Lord is one. The Lord is unique, and unique in his mercy, unique in his kindness, unique in his graciousness. And we are going to learn about this Lord. And the purpose of this session is to fall in love with the scripture. So actually, I ask maybe during this session or after this session, you can prepare something what you have learned. So one of the students had prepared like this: the experience of the Pentateuch, that is remembering the past, that they have this whole thing about remembering. So their experience of Israel. So remembering the past to strengthen the present and to shape the future. So that is the purpose, that we want to do this thing, going through this Bible, the Old Testament, the Pentateuch, that we remember the past of Israel, which is their story, which is our story, which is the story of the faith community, to strengthen our present, to give us, to get that strength for our life, and to shape the future so that our future may be shaped beautifully. And this is coming out is the fire, the burning bush, and with that it has got the roots of these 5 books. So that is what now we are going to learn about. So the Bible may be viewed not as a window to just as a past or future, but as a mirror in which we see our own experience reflected. So now it's not about somebody who lived 2000 years ago or 2500 or 3000 years ago. It is about each one of us. It is showing our life. When we look at Abraham's experiences or experiences of Jacob or Joseph, we are seeing ourselves reflected in that person. So we see in each of the character our own person. And the Bible can be seen as a photograph of Israel's continuing condition. And each of us is Israel. We are the new Israel. So we see that our life reflected in Bible. So here we have the why we are going to study Pentateuch. I don't know how this thing can be moved away. This has to be there all the time.
What is that?
The on the screen that this thing comes, mute, stop video, and all this thing. Can it go away? It has to be there. Maybe part of the. Okay, fine. So why we study Pentateuch? So it is the first and the most authoritative place it has got. Pentateuch, like our Gospels for the Christians people, so is the Pentateuch for the Jewish people and for all of us, because it is the most important, it is the heart of the Old Testament. It is regarded as the most complete revelation handed down from ancient Israel. So Pentateuch gets more important place in the Old Testament, just as our Gospel get the most important place in the New Testament. It is attributed to Moses, the only person to whom God spoke face to face. And Moses is God's most authoritative spokesperson, and to him God revealed his will. So we see the will of God revealed in this Torah. Early Christians went to Pentateuch to find out, to deepen their awareness and vision of who Jesus is, because Pentateuch is talking about Jesus. We will follow the first Jewish Christians. Just like Gospel of Matthew was seen as new Pentateuch, beginning of the Gospel of John and also Gospel of Mark is similar to Genesis beginning. In the beginning, how this thing, God was, there was Word and Word was God. So they start in the same way like the Pentateuch. And what is the meaning of Pentateuch? So pente means five, and toikos means scrolls, Pentateuch. So this teokos, it was scrolls which were kept in jar, literally jar, and there was custom of storing scrolls written on animals' skins on parchments in ceramic jars, like these jars. So this was the custom there, and that is why this name has come, Pentateuch. And what is the Hebrew name for Pentateuch and what does it mean? So you know the Hebrew word is Torah. So the meaning of the Pentateuch is called Torah. The terms Torah and nomos, it in Latin word is nomos. They do not necessarily, they do not mean just law, but in the narrow sense. This Torah means story. It means teaching. It means revelation. It means dharma. It is the instruction that God is giving. It is the guidelines that God is giving to live a better life. And it is not a burden. As you say, the law is not a burden. It is a source of joy. We need to overcome the law versus gospel prejudices. The earlier you saying law is something bad and gospel is something good. Both are important for salvation. Laws and commandments are a response to God's gracious initiative. So grace is there, grace has given, and from grace comes the demands. So God has given the grace, and then God is calling us, demanding, bringing us these demands of the laws. So the church has frequently used law to characterize not only the first five books, but the entire Old Testament. But somehow earlier, some people negatively put it as set it against contrast to the New Testament. So gospel and law, but it is not supposed to be seen as the contrast. They have to be seen as part of the, both are important for salvation. Old Testament forms 4/5 of our Bible, which is such an important big part of the Bible. But we are just concentrating on the New Testament and we are ignoring that big chunk which is important, which gives us the roots of the gospel, roots of the New Testament. So that we are forgetting. And as you say, New Testament has 260 chapters and about 8,000 verses, but Old Testament has got about more than 1,000 chapters and about 28,000 verses. And as you see over here, the different division, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, you know, the chapters 50, 40, 27, altogether so many. And altogether, Pentateuch has got 187 chapters, almost part of New Testament, entire New Testament. New Testament, as we say, has got 260 chapters, but it is a big material now we are going to see in these 6 sessions. Somewhat, some little taste of it. We cannot go through the in detail, some little experience of it. And as you see, altogether, there are 1074 chapters in the Old Testament. Now, can we see Bible as a story? That is the point. Can we see it as a story? Bible is a personal and community story. Personal story of some individual like Abraham, his son Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, their story of Moses, and then comes the people of Israel. Okay, starting with Adam and Eve and all this story. So this is a story about God's initiative, that God is taking the initiative. That is the revelation. God is revealing himself through his prophets, through his in the history, and human is responding. An appropriate response human being is giving, and that is the faith. So this is the dynamic of faith and revelation. God is revealing, and human being responds in faith. So Pentateuch tells us the story of humankind and especially of Israel, uh, from the creation of the world, creation of human beings, to the death of Moses. Unique is portrayal of God's chosen people, Israel. The Pentateuch is now boastful, triumphalist work. They are not praising Israel over all other nations, but Israel is presented in complete earthliness, rebellious, ungrateful, disobedient to God. So that is how completely, very, very matter of fact, not glorifying Israel, but showing as one is, as person is, as we are earthly human beings. And that is beauty of Pentateuch. And this story gives identity. It challenges, sustains identity in moments of crisis. The Pentateuch was an attempt to give Jewish nation in a late stage of its history a sense of identity, a sense of its past, so that they know who they are, that God has created, God has chosen. And this is the thing. This story gives them hope in the midst of hopeless situation. When succeeding generation heard the story of this part of their story, they were enabled to understand that those crises of the present were not unique. So they were found hope into their history, because it's a God in the midst of the crisis. God saves us. When we were suffering in Egypt, God saved us. So whenever we are going to suffer, God is going to hear our prayer, and God is going to save us. So that is the message. And there are genealogies are also put. So they are rooting, giving roots and deepening their personal stories. And the message of the gospel of the Pentateuch is, remember who you are. You are created by God. You are saved by God. So remain with God. So that is the story of the Pentateuch. So a great story is about everyone, or it will not last. The strange and foreign is not interesting, only the deeply personal and familiar. So this story is very familiar story. Each one personal stories are mentioned. No story has power, nor will it last unless we feel in ourselves that it is true and it is true for us. So similarly, this story of Pentateuch is like this story of the Emmaus, Jesus is going with the disciples. It is about us. We are involved into the story. Our lives are reflected in this story of humanity, and we are part of it. It is our story. And community, this Old Testament community, preserved those stories that were useful. They enabled the group to survive the difficult moments of history. They were a mirror in which the succeeding generation could see their own identity reflected, their failures outlined, their hopes reaffirmed. It may have been this kind of story and this kind alone that was repeated, handed down to the next generation, treasured, and used liturgically. And that is how they became canonical, and that is the Bible. So this is what we have in the Bible, that the stories which give hope, which strengthens our identity, which help us to know who we are. So now this is a little introductory part. The Old Testament story of Israel can be seen as into the seven parts, seven historical parts. First part is called prehistory. That is not the age of the first parents. You might have questions after that. We will have a little time, maybe 5-10 minutes for question answer session. But it is called prehistory. And when I'll take each book, that time we will see that. Then comes the first 11 chapters of Genesis. We will see in the next tomorrow the Genesis part. So the first two parts, the prehistory part, Genesis 1 to 11, and the age of the patriarchs, which is Genesis 12 to 50. These two parts we will see tomorrow. Then comes the age of Moses, which is from 1250. This is a year before Jesus Christ, before Christ, 1250 to 1200. So these 50 years, that is Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. So those four books. So basically, we are going to do in Pentateuch the first three parts of the history of Israel, the story of Israel. So the fourth part is the age of Joshua and Judges when they come and enter. And in that Joshua, Judges, Ruth book comes. Then the age of kings and prophets. And then in that monarchical period is there where there is United Kingdom and the divided kingdom. United Kingdom was Saul's time, David's time, Solomon's time. Divided kingdom and has got when the 922, and then there was Northern Kingdom. You know, this is the whole history of Israel. You might have heard about it, but I'm not going to go more in detail, just only you have the overview of it. So that there is a fall of Samaria took place, fall of Jerusalem took place, which is from Assyrian invasion and then Babylonian invasion. And then comes the exilic period, which is 587 to 538 these years. And then comes the post-exilic period, which is the from 538 till the birth of Jesus, around 54 BC. So this is also divided into four parts: Persian period, then Greek period, Hasmonean or also Maccabean, we say Maccabean period, and Palestine under Roman period, Roman Empire. So there we have different divisions of the Old Testament. This is just for your understanding. Now Pentateuch is a city rebuilt after two earthquakes. And what are these two earthquakes? One is fall of Samaria. Fall of Samaria, as I mentioned, it is part shaping the history of Israel. That took place. There were two kingdoms. One is Northern Kingdom after Solomon, Jeroboam and Rehoboam. They got separated, and then the Northern Kingdom and Southern Kingdom was divided. Southern Kingdom was the capital was Jerusalem. Northern Kingdom capital was Samaria. But Samaria was destroyed and completely shattered. Army was conquered, Assyrian army, and put an end to this country, which is the. Does somebody is speaking something? Okay. Then comes the destruction. Okay.
That was okay.
अगं चित्त गेला त्याच्याकडे चित्त
Magdalene.
बसा
Oh.
Ask them to
others.
mute.
Can you move the others?
I can mute.
Mute all button.
Hello. Some of them have not muted. At least ask
Okay,
them to mute.
okay, fine. I have done that. Okay, fine. So the second session, this thing is the destruction of Jerusalem. And that is what is very important. That is what we call exile. Exodus and exile, those are two important events. But this Pentateuch is getting shaped historically by these two events. And that is why these two events are also important to consider, because scholarly perspective, these two events are shaping, and that is why they are looking back and writing Pentateuch from that perspective. Now we see these 5 books, and there Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And content of the book is Genesis is about creation, time of founding fathers. It is like giving the foundation to the whole thing. And Hebrew name is Bereshit. Bereshit, bara, Elohim. Mean in the beginning. Bereshit mean in the beginning. So Bereshit means beginning. So Hebrew word is different than our Latin or our Genesis is a Latin word, and that is what was translated in English. So we follow the Latin word or the title, but Jewish people follow these Hebrew titles. Then Exodus is called Shemoth, which begins with these are the names, Elle Shemoth. And Leviticus is Vaikra, and God called out. And Numbers is Ba Midbar, mean in the wilderness. And Deuteronomy means Ha Dabarim, mean the word. So these are the Hebrew names. Anyway, we are not so much interested in Hebrew names, but then similarly our Pope's encyclicals also, the first words used to be the title. So the content of Genesis, as you know, it is about creation of the world and the time of the founding fathers, starting with Abraham and all. Noah is part of the creation and all that. Then Exodus is experience in Egyptian bondage. What happened, and they are coming out, going out. Ex hodos mean the way out, and the making of the covenant and the temple, the tabernacle, that part. Then Leviticus is about sacrifices and duties of the Levitical priests and also the holiness of the common people. Numbers is about census and wilderness journey, and Deuteronomy is the repetition of Torah. Deuteronomy means second Torah. It is the second law, and identity and obligation of Israel are put. So we will see all these things more in detail in the next 5 sessions. Now, the point, this session is a little technical session, technical in the sense that you should know also the scholarly ideas about the Pentateuch. It's not only, so you should know it's like more theological in nature and not so much, as you say, sermonizing. This is not about sermon. It's a theology course. So can we consider the Pentateuch as one unit? There are arguments for unity. They think that this is a one story, one unit. All 5 books can be seen as one part. So there is a separate title since antiquity. It's called Torah by the Jewish people, Pentateuch by the Christian people. So there is a separate title is given for these 5 books. Then distinct beginning is there, the creation of the world, and distinct end. It begins with the creation of the world and it ends with the death of Moses. So that is a kind of a narrative which is very clearly given. And the story moves with dramatic effect and with continuity from one episode to the next. So there is a kind of, as you say, 2 big parts are there. Prehistorical part, and the part of the Genesis part, and then the story of entire Israel from Exodus onwards, Exodus till Deuteronomy. So there is a kind of a dramatic effect, a kind of clear running theme, as we see in this also that movie 10 Commandments, that is all about Exodus till Deuteronomy and all those parts. There is a clear running theme of promise and struggle for the realization of the promise. So there is God has given the promise and people are struggling. They are going through the struggle and to realize this promise. And as you see, the last Deuteronomy 34, 10 to 12 is kind of seen as a dividing line, where Moses' person is mentioned, is greater than any other prophet. And Moses is now is dead. And then about Moses, it is given, looking back at his entire life, his preeminence with his relationship to God, and Exodus as the foundational event. So that way, this entire Pentateuch is seen as one unity. Then there are also arguments for diversity. There are different literary types are there. So many different, there are prose is there, there are narratives, there are poetry, there are legal codes. Speeches are given by long speeches of Moses. Then there are public records of genealogies and different covenant ceremonies, regulation about daily life. So these are like prose. Then narratives about the story about tribal sagas, or three stories, big stories of the Abraham story, Isaac story, Jacob story, like that story. So there are different narratives are there, and among those also different types. There are hero sagas, hero stories, like uh, Moses is holding on that staff and fighting those, Joshua is fighting with Amalekites. So like these stories are there, sanctuary legends, so which earlier might have been separate and which are brought together and from different time periods. So there are these kind of different stories, narratives are there. Then poetry, priestly blessing, that we say on the 1st of January, that may the Lord bless you and keep you, and all this priestly blessing, victory songs, work songs, love song, family blessings, clan vows, all these different things are put together. So it's not only of one author writing one book, one style. There are different styles are there, and there are laws are there, legal codes. There are Decalogue, which is, the 10 commandments, and there is covenant code, holiness code, Deuteronomic code, from different time periods, not of the same time. So there you see there is a big diversity in this. So that is why that these are the arguments against the unity, not that one person has written this. So we will but still study Pentateuch as one unit. It is work in its own right. It is recognized as such by Jews, Samaritans, Christians, and Muslims. But not that one author, but it is one work. Unity is there. Some scholars like this Friedman, he's looking 9 books as together, five books of this Torah plus Joshua, Judges, first and second Samuel is considered as one book, and first and second Kings. But we are not going to look at Pentateuch or Octateuch. Octateuch means first 8 books. Hexateuch means first 6 books, and Tetrateuch means first 4 books. So they are not considering Deuteronomy as the part of the Pentateuch, as the part of that whole unity. But we are not, these are the scholarly perspectives. Now there is this written by, is Moses the author of the Pentateuch? What are the problems with Mosaic authorship? Because Moses is writing himself as the third person sometimes. It's the story of Moses. So is it that Moses has written? Very unlikely that Moses has written this. Different designations for deities there. God is called sometimes Elohim, sometimes it's called Yahweh. Yahweh we don't pronounce. So that is why we say the Lord. If you see in the Bible, it is written as the Lord. The Lord, which is standing for with the Lord in capital, Lord. So that means Yahweh. Yahweh, the name is holy. The name is holy. So that is why normally it is not to be pronounced. Yes. So rabbis observed that God is used in relation to the world and the Lord is used in relation to Israel. So there is a reason for using these words. Then there are lots of repetition. 10 commandments is given 3 times. Actually, Exodus 20 and Deuteronomy 5 are exactly the same, almost the same 10 commandments. But Exodus 34 also 10 commandments are given, but they are different. And actually, the words 10 commandments come in Exodus 34, 10, Decalogue. That comes in Exodus 34, but that is a cultic Decalogue. I will talk to you about it in the when I talk about Exodus. Then patriarchs gave their wives into the harem of a foreign king. So that is Egyptian king and the Philistine king. That is Abraham is giving his wife to the Egyptian, and Abraham is in chapter 12. Abraham is giving his wife to the Philistine king in chapter 20. Then Isaac is also giving his wife to the king Abimelech in chapter 26. So this is also the kind of same repetition is taking place. Then Isaac is receiving his name when he laughs. That is also given 3 times. So there is so many repetition in 3 different contexts. Besides, there are duplication, 2 accounts of creations, 2 genealogies of Adam, 2 genealogies of Shem, 2 covenants between Abraham and his God. to revelation to Jacob. So like this, two calls of Moses, one priestly, one Yahwistic. So two sets of laws. Yeah, two tents of meetings set. One is inside the inside the camp, one is outside the camp. So there are some contradictions are there, and that seems to be that there are two different sources, at least two different sources from which it is coming. Then geographical discrepancies are also there. Is Torah given to Moses at Mount Sinai or Mount Horeb? Two different names are there. It is the same name. Sinai and Horeb is the same, but from two different sources it is coming. Is the tent of meeting outside the camp or center of the camp? So these kind of things. Now, this is not to shake our faith, but to realize that there are different sources coming together and forming this part which is known as Pentateuch. Then chronological problem, to say that Moses is the author, we cannot say that how can Moses refer to a time before any king reigned in Israel, when the monarchy came into existence later on in 1000 BCE, centuries after his lifetime. Then writing about his own death, he cannot write about his own death in Deuteronomy. So that name of Yahweh or the Lord was revealed first to Moses. Then how was it found in Genesis 4 and all these things? So that it was revealed, that it is mentioned in Exodus 6:3. Then how it is coming before that in Genesis. So variation in stories. So many creation accounts, two creation accounts, variation in language. So language, we can find out that some languages like 10th century language, some is 7th century language, because you can do the linguistic analysis and find it out. So that means that it is not written by Moses, but it is written later on by different sources. And so all this information, there are some discrepancy and all that we find. Then editors were concerned, actually we have to find out not a chronology. So there is not like, it is not like a complete history writing in the modern sense of the word, that it is writing completely that historical perspective. They wrote in order to enable, it is a theological history. It's a history from the theological perspective, not a chronological perspective. So that we need to understand. These are the various stories coming together with the oral history and all. So I think you might have heard this about any Bible session, you come to know that it is not exactly like literal history, literal truth. That is what we have. They wrote to enable Israel to realize their destiny as the kingdom of priests, your royal priesthood of holy nation, a light to the nations, that you become a light to the nations, that you imbibe that spirit of the Lord. So rather than that secular historian writing like that. So Moses is not the author, he's the authority. Authority. So Moses is the person behind, when it is his story. That is what we need to realize. So Moses is kind of a person backbone of it, but he's not the author of this Pentateuch. So that is what we need to realize, to look at it from the holistic perspective. Some conservative apologetic scholars try to explain the contradiction, and they try to just say, no, this is the thing, and there's called fundamentalistic interpretation of the scripture. We don't follow that line of thinking, saying it is all literally true. It is the same thing like God created the world in 7 days, in the 7 days like that, and in 4500 BCE. So those things, theories, we don't imbibe, we don't follow. Even the Catholic Church in its teaching mentions that we don't follow fundamentalistic interpretation of scripture. There are various models about the Pentateuch, the three compositional models. One is that there were various fragments were together. So maybe 20, 30, 40 different fragments together, different, which were, some were about legal material, some were cultic material, some were legends, some were different narratives, some were poetries, and they all fragments were brought together and it was composed. Then there is supplementary model, that there was this some main documents, and to that some supplements, some things were added, small things. But the most acceptable model is called documentary hypothesis. Documentary hypothesis, which is proposed by Wellhausen. Wellhausen, and he has proposed this documentary hypothesis, which is saying there are four sources. We will not see that. So there are these four sources which are known as JEDP. JEDP. J stands for Yahwistic. Yahwistic. E stands for Elohistic. Here there is a chart given over here. You see, in this chart it is mentioned. Can you see this chart? JEDP. So J is Yahwistic, Elohistic, Deuteronomistic, and priestly. So these are the four sources. J was in the southern Palestine, that is in Judah. So it is said to be in the time of King Solomon's time. So that time some things were, some writing was done, some stories were collected, and it put in the 10th century some texts like primeval history, patriarchal saga, the Genesis stories, birth of Israel in Egypt. So some stories were put by J authors, and they had this called God as Yahweh, or the Lord. Then Elohist, and they were expert in narrating incidents. They were like storytellers, psychological truth, anthropomorphic. God is very near. God is like acting like a human being, forming like a carpenter, like a potter. He's forming the human being, and he's walking with the human being. So very God is very near to us. That is anthropomorphic. Importance to cultic centers of the patriarch Shechem. So these, and they were like etiology, I mean, telling the story how these things, the name woman came, how Bethel got the name, the house of God. So like this. So, and they were had their theological part, Israel's history of salvation. That was their focus. That history is salvation history. Salvation is God's act. And Judah is given more importance because it is coming from the southern side. There is southern kingdom, Judah, and northern kingdom, Israel or Ephraim. Okay, the northern Palestine, Elohistic comes from northern Palestine, which is also Ephraim. Ephraim, that the tribe of Joseph's son, Ephraim, from that the name comes. It is in the 9th century BC after the division. So northern tribe, 10 tribes get separated, 2 tribes remain here with the line of David's line, Judah, and other 10 tribes, they form the northern kingdom. And this was formed, this tradition, Elohistic tradition, formed in the northern kingdom. They have this promise to the fathers, more prophetic in nature. Moses and Exodus, Sinai covenant. So they bring in lots of this emphasis on the prophetic element, covenant element, wilderness wandering. So that then God is seen as Elohim. God is transcendent. Now God is not so near. God is little far from us. The cultic places in the north. Here the cultic places in the south. So Shechem, Bethel, Shiloh. So these kind of a thing. And they have given importance to the prophets, Abraham, Miriam, Moses. So this, I will send this PowerPoint to you. You can see this thing more in detail about this thing. And then Deuteronomistic. Deuteronomistic comes later in the time of Josiah. Josiah was a king, and in his reform, it began in north earlier, but after 721, northern kingdom was destroyed. Then they brought this tradition to the southern kingdom, and the Deuteronomistic mostly developed in this time of Josiah, 7th century BC. And Deuteronomy and former prophets, so that those were written in this time, this text. Okay, and they have the preacher style. They want to sermonizing, communicating the message. Moses' speeches, if you see the book of Deuteronomy, it is written by these authors, and he's saying, God, there is a theory of retribution. So because you have sinned, that is why you are getting punishment. And it is a very simple language, very rich vocabulary. It's trying to explain in simple, repetitive style, like a preacher style, to explain why, what is happening to you. Now you are suffering. It is because of your own, you have gone away. That is why you are suffering. So that is the election, fidelity, selection, God's love, and all those were their themes. Then priestly is very important. Actually, nowadays they don't see so much these all these divisions, JEDP, but mainly seeing priestly and non-priestly, these two main divisions. Because this JE and JED, the difference is very not so strong. They are almost together, but priestly texts are very distinct. So you can see two main division, priestly and non-priestly. And priestly is, it is began in Babylon and later in Jerusalem. Babylon at the time of exile. So as you see, it starts in the 6th century BC. After they go in the Babylonian time, when everything was destroyed, the priestly authors, they came together and they tried to give identity based on law, based on covenant, based on Torah. So that and this is a big chunk of portion, especially Exodus 25 to Numbers 10. The entire part is to the priestly authors. They have put, and they have their concerns, the cultic concern. And Genesis story of creation 1 is from them. They see God as the transcendent God. Cult, worship, ritual are important. Interested in genealogy to give the root. When you are completely uprooted, when you don't have any kind of, when you are in exile in Babylon, you are completely lost. Then they say we are rooted, and then they give the genealogy, going back to the original source. And word of God is very important. Purity and holiness, special attention to the feasts, laws, that which we have to celebrate again and again. To memory is given lots of importance. And God is now indwelling presence. And the uniqueness of Israel is, they are giving identity, these priestly authors. So as we see nowadays, now there is this model is for JEDP model, but now scholars are, see, there is no complete agreement among the scholars. English speaking scholars are going, still holding on to JEDP model, but in Germany, German speaking scholars are also very strong. They are saying now there are only two major identifiable sources, P source and non-P source. Non-P source combines all the JED. Sometimes the division is not so clear. So P source is concerned about sacrificial cult, formal regulation, as I said, a strong interest in chronology, genealogy. So they are giving precise chronological framework. Abraham's years are mentioned. When he was 75 years old, when he's 100 years old, when he's 137, 100. So those years are mentioned. Non-P source had little concern for details. So they individuals offer, they give long series of stories in very lively fashion. We would like non-P source more important because they are very good for our faith. But both are important because that is how it's given concreteness is given. So the little importance about the P source I will say, and then the priestly authors told the same Exodus story as that contained in the Yahwist and Elohist narratives, but they retold the story from the vantage point of exile because they were in exile. They found themselves in the same situation as the Israel in the first Exodus. They were in Egypt. So like now, as they were in Egypt, now they were in Babylon. They were in the same situation, slavery. Once again, they were a people without rights, without land, longing for the hour of redemption, which would bring them to the promised land. When the priestly authors retold the Exodus story or any other story, was in full realization that they were actually reliving these events in their own day. It might even be said that it was only then, in the sorrow of the exile, that Israel came to understand fully the meaning of the first Exodus from Egypt. So they are now in that situation of exile. They are looking at that experience of Israel in Egypt, and then they are rewriting. We can see now, just summarizing the point of this Pentateuch as a journey of faith, fulfillment of promise, that God keeps the promises. Promises were given to Abraham in Genesis 12, 1 to 3. Three promises. Which are those three promises? Of descendants, that you will get posterity, that you will get children, and several times this promise is repeated. Promise of God's presence. So these three realities, that's we call Panikar uses the word cosmotheandrism. Cosmos, Cosmos mean the nature, land, cosmos. Theos mean God, and andros mean human being. Cosmotheandrism. So these three are the promises related to the human being, related to God, His presence, His blessing, and related to the cosmos, the land, the land. So that all these three promises are given, and these promises are partially fulfilled. In Genesis 12 to 50, posterity, that is the human first promise, is fulfilled. Exodus and Leviticus, relationship with God. Now God is near you. God is present in that tabernacle. So that is, and Numbers and Deuteronomy, now they are slowly entering into the promised land. They are not completely into the promised land, but already Deuteronomy, that other side, Numbers, you see some reference in the Transjordan area. Already some land they have got. So not full fulfillment of the promises, but partial fulfillment of the promises is taking place. So it's a journey of faith and fulfillment of promises, but it is incomplete story. It is not full story, happy ending, everything is over. No, the situation, it is ending actually at the death of Moses, and they are still outside the promised land. They are still not in the promised land. So it is incomplete story. We find that the land is not fully conquered, only Transjordan land is conquered. There is a point of tension and expectation. The goal of the journey has not reached, and Israel's leader, the dominant human figure since the Exodus, Moses, is dead. So Genesis begins with creation, and Deuteronomy ends with the death of Moses. At the end of Genesis, we have similar state of affairs in the form of the death of Joseph. You say Genesis begins with the creation and ends in the coffin in Egypt. So it begins like that. So it is not, there is a tension, there is expectancy, and there is promise is not fully fulfilled. Already and not yet. That aspect is there. Exodus concludes with the cloud covering the tent and glory of Lord entering the tabernacle. We must realize that tabernacle is a symbol of the mobile presence of God. So tabernacle is not static. Tabernacle is moving, uh, because tabernacle was carried with them. So journey is the focus. And Leviticus and Numbers seems to be apparently static, yet we find the change in the geographical location at the end of the books. Leviticus concludes at Mount Sinai, whereas Numbers concludes with plains of Moab. So they keep on moving. It's a pilgrimage church as pilgrim. So they are moving towards promised land. And Deuteronomic laws describes movement towards, directed towards the future, by stating the statutes and ordinances to be followed in the land. So how to look at the future. So Deuteronomy entire focus is looking backward and moving forward. So that kind of a thing. So this is what the strong message of Pentateuch is about: God's faithfulness to his promises, and also about human cooperation. We also realize that in spite of the imperfect human cooperation, God carries out his promises. So human beings are grumbling, murmuring, difficulties. So I'm ending now in 2 minutes. Won't see that. So here is the map. I will just end that, just to have that geographical perspective. So we have here, here we have this perspective of Egypt and Babylon and Israel. So this area is very important, because that is what we are going to see. This is known as Fertile Crescent. Fertile Crescent. These are to Mesopotamia, this area, Assyria, Babylon, and here Egypt, and then we have Israel. Okay, I will end at this thing. It's now time for question answers. If you have any questions, it's free to ask.
People can ask questions directly. Are there no questions? Just unmute them, Edwin.
I had only muted one person. I had not muted everybody.
And the others, can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, I think they can unmute themselves.
Ashley, you have a question? If there's no question, Edwin, we'll talk about how we can proceed. When is your next class?
So tomorrow is the class. Tomorrow is about Genesis, and then Thursday, Friday, 6:30 we will start. Okay, 6:30 to 7:30. Anyway, today there was a little this thing.
So 24th, that is tomorrow, and then next class 29th, is it?
Thursday, next Thursday.
Next Thursday. Okay. That is 30th. Okay. Only Thursday. I mean, this class is on. So it will be